Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. We've got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about the $1 billion more that the Biden administration is going to give to Israel. That's coming up in just a few minutes. I thought we were not going to do that as the invasion of Rafah is beginning. All the troops are there. They're ready and waiting. What does that mean? And we're going to dig into this Trump case. This is something that you've asked for, and I will deliver. Because I think many of us don't know how these trials work, what the role of a prosecutor is, how it is that Michael Cohen, uh, President Trump's former personal lawyer, they call him the fixer, but that's what your lawyer does for you. You have to tell them everything. And they said he was not the witness that anyone expected. How did that happen? How was he prepped? Who's winning? Who's losing? What kind of case needs to be presented for either side to win? How do we even get here? And why is this considered to be the most inconsequential of the cases of all? Got a lot to talk about. But first, let's talk about this $1 billion that is going to go to Israel from the Biden administration. How many of us need $1 billion in the United States today? And when you really see the breakdown, it is just stunning. I am Santita Jackson. You are on AM 950 Radio. You can stream us on am950radio.com. You can also stream me on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Please, everybody, share the show with at least one person. Share the show with at least one person. Click the like and subscribe icon, and then click the bell so that when we come up, you can be notified. And then, of course, please, the Santita Jackson and Friends page, the Santita Jackson and Friends page. I want to see you there. That's the only page where I can be active, everybody. They've been kicking everybody else off of a landing page, but my real page is Santita Jackson and Friends. And of course, I'm on Twitter, also known as X now, at Santita J, at Santita J, or the Santita J Show, but go at Santita J. Let's get to it, everybody. What is going on? We kind of thought maybe this was behind us. Um, the headline from Common Dreams says so much of it. Biden moves forward with what some are calling an immoral $1 billion arms shipment to Israel. Less than a week after he said he was pausing shipment of thousands of bombs that have been rained upon the Palestinian people already. We've had several Nagasaki's and Hiroshimas already over there. It's just unbelievable. But this package includes, according to these reports, $700 million for tank ammunition, $500 million for tactical vehicles, $60 million in mortar rounds. And that's what congressional aides told the Associated Press. But the Biden administration has been claiming that the bombs should not be dropped in densely populated cities. Most international organizations have said that Israel, maybe that was Freudian, has broken international law. Many of them, by using, and particularly American law, by using the arms that we sell to them. To rain on the Palestinian people. The bombs are not supposed to be used that way, but they are. The munitions are not supposed to be used that way against these people, but they are. So it's a breaking of law. So let's talk about what we're looking at. In the midst of rising demonstrations, we are watching our young people show up and show out at colleges all over the country, but we're watching Americans and we're watching people all over the world. I just saw on TikTok a march in Berlin. They said it was about 65,000 people. Trust me, I've been marching all of my life, Kathy Kelly from World Beyond War. It was 1 million people if it was one person. When you march a lot, 100 people, 500 people, 1,000, 10, 25. You see it. And the streets were just teeming with people, but that's happening all over the world. There's indeed, even though they've been denied permits for the Democratic Convention, during the Democratic Convention, at least 70 groups have coalesced together to have the largest demonstration for Palestinian rights in the history of the United States. Whether it's permitted or not, I do believe it's going to happen. And a lot of things are going to happen when the Democrats come to town. And in fact, Kathy Kelly and Dr. David Gibbs from the University of Arizona, historian, and of course, Alex Nelson from If Not Now Chicago, Julia, graduate student who's a student activist there at UNC Chapel Hill. We're going to ask her about what's happening with the encampments, and attorney Mark Fancher, National Conference of Black Lawyers. What this is going to be an interesting summer. August 13th through the 17th, the Rainbow Push Coalition will have our international conference leading into the Democratic Convention. Alex, need to talk to you, and if not now, about that, because we have a lot of organizing to do. Because Reverend Jesse Jackson has opened up Attorney Fancher and Dr. Gibbs and Kathy Kelly, the Rainbow Push building, uh, to all of you, a place where you can call home, a place where we can gather and organize and talk. We've got several meeting spaces, a sanctuary that holds more than 1,000 people. We have a community hall that holds about 400 or 500 people, and a chapel that holds a couple hundred people. We can do it, and we don't need to find any place else. Kathy Kelly knows the place well. So let me start with you, Dr. David Gibbs. Are you surprised by uh, by $1 billion more in arms going to Israel? But before you say anything, you've got a book that's coming out in days, and you can pre-order it on Amazon. And it really, Kathy Kelly helps, and Mark Fancher brings us to this moment: the revolt of the rich.
I appreciate Santita. I always appreciate your being very kind to me to mention the book. Yeah, Revolt of the Rich: How the Politics of the 1970s Widened America's Class Divide. It's going to be out in about 2 weeks. But on the issue of the $1 billion, I'm not surprised. Obviously, everything in Biden's background suggests throughout his career since the 70s, since he entered the Senate as a young man, he's been steeped in the Israel lobby. He's always been considered to be one of the most enthusiastic supporters of the Israel lobby. I suspect that's one of the principal reasons, not the only one, but one of the reasons he was selected as Obama's vice president, to reassure the Israel lobby. And it's very hard to believe at his age, at 81, he's capable of really reevaluating one of the most longstanding biases he's had throughout his life. That's improbable. He doesn't seem like the type to reevaluate basic principles of his belief system. He's under a lot of political pressure, that's clear. It's going to be a close election. We all know that. This could cost him a couple of percentage points of his vote, of Arab Americans who, places like Michigan, who either will vote for some third party or not vote, young people who, as much as they dislike Trump, may vote for someone like Cornel West or Jill Stein, or again, not vote. And, I think it's very hard to believe any of these people will vote for Trump, but they will not necessarily vote for Biden, and that could cost him the election. And undoubtedly, the Democrats are fearful of that. They're fearful of the image of a party in disarray, which is already what it's starting to look like based on the demonstrations. They're afraid of the damage being done to America's international reputation, which is enormous and probably irreparable after a certain point. And so I think based on that, they're trying to do some symbolic changes. One point, there was talk that the United States would suspend aid to Israel if Israel undertakes the attack on Rafah that they've planned to undertake. I never took that very seriously or believed Biden would follow through on that. And I doubt he'll follow through on that. And again, what we've seen just as of today is an additional $1 billion in aid. I doubt it's going to be suspended if Israel starts destroying Rafah, as seems likely.
The truth is there. I mean, they're there. They're waiting.
Right. That's right. That's right. No, it's already begun. Really, the attack on Rafah, the assault on Rafah, has already begun, with horrific consequences. I should have horrific beyond already the massive toll. I think the official death toll now is 35,000. It's believed to be significantly higher than that, perhaps far higher than that. We don't really know the full death toll. The number of people wounded or starving, many times that number. The number of these people who are children as a percentage of that 35,000, I don't know the exact number, but it's enormous. All of that has not moved the United States to, um, again, what needs to be done here is the United States to say that Israel needs to move towards a permanent ceasefire and a two-state solution, which has officially always been American policy in principle. Israel needs to do that, or it gets no more aid, not another dime. Or better yet, in my view, would be no more aid, period. Because it's not clear to me why the U.S. has ever been giving Israel what has amounted to one of the largest, perhaps the largest foreign aid program in history to a high-income country, all right, that, arguably doesn't really need it. And so why are they doing that? Why have they been doing that for the last 50 years? That's another question. But the more immediate question is, the United States is subsidizing and enabling what is going on in Gaza. And however much American officials like Tony Blinken may wring their hands and say they're upset about it and they're troubled about it, the bottom line is they're not really doing anything about it except making it possible. And I'd be very surprised if that changes. I should add, but even politically, it's not clear to me Biden at this point can repair the damage he's done to his reputation among the young people who are demonstrating, or among Arab Americans in Michigan. I suspect any concession he makes will look political and probably will be political. And it's probably not going to help him that much. Therefore, his incentive to do it isn't that great. So I'd be very surprised if there's any change in policy here.
Alex Nelson, if not now Chicago, I've had the pleasure of working with you over the past few months. And I've loved the energy and the intention and the focus of you young people. And I'm so impressed with the coalitions that you all have built. Attorney Mark Fancher, if I want to find Palestinian or Black activists, I can call them because they're all working together. And I'm impressed that even as Julia is pursuing her graduate work, and it's arduous, she's at the point of a terminal degree, she is dedicated to this struggle. Alex, what do you make of this? I mean, we're in Chicago. There's a great wringing of hands about what's going to be happening in Chicago, and it's going to happen. Nobody can stop it. But when you see it's a few days ago, we were left with the impression, we were told that this was not going to happen. And now you see $1 billion more. I mean, weapons. What does that make you think? Particularly as we're going into August. I mean, that's not even 90 days away.
Yeah, thank you for having me back, Santita, to talk about this. I'm distressed and I'm angry, honestly. We are constantly fighting for scraps in this country. We are told that we can't, afford universal health care, that we can't house the homeless, that we cannot provide universal school lunch for public school students. As you mentioned, we're in Chicago. The Chicago Transit Authority is facing a $735 million fiscal cliff in the coming year. It's an existential crisis for the CTA, the third largest public transit system in the country. And so the knowledge that the Biden administration is just effectively writing blank checks for the most horrifying, to create the most horrifying human rights crisis that has happened in my lifetime is appalling. I'm so mad. I am so devastated on behalf of the people of Gaza and of Palestine and the children that are enduring starvation, like real, legitimate starvation, amputations without anesthesia. Over 10,000 Palestinians are buried under the rubble right now, possibly alive, possibly dead. And I think the numbers that we're being told are way low estimates. The number everybody says is 40,000 dead. That's just because that's what can be verified when their entire health infrastructure and reporting structure is completely decimated. I'm sure the number is in the six figures at this point. So I'm devastated and I'm furious. And the fact that Joe Biden said, there's going to be a red line when it comes to Rafah and then completely backtracked is he's just totally rolling over to Benjamin Netanyahu, and whatever Netanyahu wants, Netanyahu gets. And it is to Biden's detriment and to all of our detriments, because as David Gibbs said, I just don't know how Biden can repair his reputation at this point.
There's nothing. Is there anything he can do for you? Because we don't want people not to vote. you do have options, and I think that's one of the things that we have to grow up in our politics in the United States, Alex, because down ballot we've got a lot at stake, and I'm hoping that we don't sacrifice that, but that could happen. I mean, it really could happen. I mean, what are you hearing? I mean, as you talk amongst your community.
So Chicago's an interesting place because when it comes to the presidential race, we're in, safe blue states. So most people don't feel like their votes matter at the top of the ticket. But with that said, people are pretty engaged down ballot. But David mentioned what this might look like for Arab Americans in Michigan. And I honestly don't know. I don't know how you make that choice between Donald Trump or Joe Biden when you've borne witness to Joe Biden creating and causing a genocide. It is just so horrifying and so appalling. You're correct. I don't want people to not vote. And I think that that's one of the secondary and devastating outcomes from this is the fact that people are now disengaged with the system. They view that the system is just irredeemable, and it creates space for fascism to completely take over and sweep the whole thing. And it's really devastating, and it's really scary.
Julia, as you have been, I mean, you're part of the student community who have been demonstrating and who've had your encampments violently, um, they've been violently violated, if I may say it that way, Kathy Kelly. Because now the New York Times, welcome to the party. They said, "Oh, pro-Israeli sympathizers have overturned the encampment, attacked these peaceful demonstrators at UCLA," but they've been doing it all over the country. Every time you try to march peaceably, this is what's happening. And now uh, the administration says one thing, and then we see something else happening. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I'm also not surprised. I think I was surprised when he said there was a red line, and I'm not surprised he crossed it. Um, I think we have to recognize that Rafah has been being attacked since the beginning. Like 3 days into the war, I think Israel bombed the crossing. So there was never a red line, and there probably won't be one. And so I think that Gaza will cost Biden the election, and I think it has cost him the election. And I think that in some ways that's being dismissed by people in like my parents' generation. Like I'll post something on Instagram that's like Biden came to North Carolina maybe like a month and a half ago, and there was protests, calling him Genocide Joe. And I posted it on Instagram, and a bunch of my dad's friends like responded and were like, "Well, do you want Trump to be elected?" And it's like, no, I don't want Trump to be elected, but I also don't want to support a genocide. And I think that it's clear that the government and that the Democratic Party are not taking young people seriously, and they're not recognizing that we are a strong voting bloc. We are a strong voting bloc that typically votes for Democrats. They're also not taking Arab Americans seriously. And they always talk about Michigan, but they're not taking Michigan seriously. And so, yeah, but I do want to emphasize the down ballot issue. I do still think it's incredibly important to vote. In North Carolina this week, we saw the Board of Trustees of UNC gut DEI to give $2.3 million more to the police force. Mm-hmm. And we knew this was coming. But at a state university, the people who are in control are ultimately the state legislature, ultimately the people in Raleigh. And so that is just an example of how down ballot voting is important, and it is important on this issue in addition to other issues. So I hope that people will still vote, even if they're not voting for Biden, because there are so many other issues, and local government is so important.
Well, if I can give you a lesson that I've learned, Kathy Kelly, just having grown up in the civil rights movement and in the human rights struggle. When Reverend Jesse Jackson ran for president, and those, as you recall, Marcus, those were like those were among the first times that most of us voted. It was certainly the first time that I did. He didn't get his votes, his millions of votes from the party. He brought them to the party. And he said, you don't wait for them to tell you what to do. You tell them what to do. So I think I would suggest humbly that part of this protest that I would put myself in. I think that everyone here, we're all allied here. We've got to emphasize why. Wait a minute, just one more thing. Vote, vote down ballot. I'm not going to tell you what to do at the top. No, I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to hear this but Trump, but for Trump argument. You're not. That's not a winning argument, Kathy Kelly. With too many people, they're like, look, I got genocide right now. I got fascism that's coming right now. Look, you trying. Norman Solomon was banned from Facebook for 2 weeks for asking for peace at the beginning of the Ukraine war. He's one of the icons in the progressive struggle. 2 weeks. When you're asking, it's wait a minute, picketing for peace is illegal? What are we doing, Kathy Kelly? What about this $1 billion more that's going to all of these munitions, all of these tanks? And what do you make of that?
Well, I think the readiness to use starvation as a weapon to destroy the homes of people in Gaza, telling people, okay, you live in the north temporarily, now go south. You're in the south, now go north. There is nowhere to go, and the land is so contaminated, and there's so much possibility for more explosives to be detonated without more bombs being dropped. It is hideous and ghastly. And what would be really, really scary here in the United States is if the student movement wasn't speaking up. Imagine if the younger generation was so callous or uncaring that they would prioritize other things, more trivial things. But this group has their moral compass matching their capacity to be articulate. And I think that's a moment of great grace for this country. We are fortunate to have the student movement that's present now. When I think about the idea of people having no homes to go to, we've no reason to trust the Israeli government or the Israeli occupying forces. They have already been so clear about their determination to accomplish total ethnic cleansing. And so the idea of the United States building a pier seems to be a very, very dangerous military move, because if the pier exists and if the U.S. brings in the naval transport, it could be that Netanyahu is actually thinking he'll deliver on his promise to accomplish total ethnic cleansing. So I think the role that the United States has played in continually siding with militarism is dangerous, it's foolhardy, it's cruel, and it ought to be opposed all around the world. And that's one other piece of good news, that there is international solidarity, it's intergenerational, and I believe people are learning a great deal from the fossil fuels industry and Black Lives Matter and the former BDS campaign. So this is a time of considerable strength, and we ought to play to that strength. And as your father would have said, Santita, tell them what we're going to do and what ought to be done, not wait till we get orders from people who should never, ever be obeyed.
What do you think will happen in Chicago in August?
Well, I think the Democrats are hiding already. They're doing everything they can.
I mean, they're thinking about making part of the convention virtual. Did you know that, Alex and Julia and Dr. Gibbs and Mark? I mean, I'm like, wait, this is not the pandemic. Are they going to put Biden in the basement again?
I think they are so afraid of appearing to have lost control and to be the party of chaos that they are, maybe they're praying for a pandemic. They may be wishing bird flu could help them out. But I think they'll make it as hybrid as possible, with more of an emphasis on virtual than on in-person.
But I think the people are going to be here anyway.
Oh, no doubt. And I think the media could still be pushed. And also, I think that the student encampments aren't going to disappear by any means. And that's one other thing that's being exposed that I think is so important, that a lot of these major universities are actually gigantic hedge funds giving money that's hard-earned money for these, enormously expensive tuitions over to the military industrial complex and real estate magnates, and then getting a tax shelter for themselves because the side hustle of education is tax exempt.
Mark Fancher, what do you make of this? I'm sure you're not surprised that the president said one thing and is doing something else. What about this $1 billion more? I mean, what does this say?
Well, it's just further information to help us to become educated. Now, I agree with Kathy Kelly that this is really a moment of strength, but it can be a stronger moment if we are really clear about what this is all about and what's actually happening. The fact is that Joe Biden is irrelevant to all of this. The Democratic Party is irrelevant to all of this. The entire political process is irrelevant because what really happens in this world is that those who control the global politics are completely outside of the electoral process. They have nothing to do with it. They are busy manipulating, orchestrating, destroying, and funding that which will make them more powerful and wealthier. And the political process in this country is really a game. And those who play this game vary in their awareness of just what role they play. There is an understanding that if you're a politician and you run for office, particularly president or the Senate or U.S. representative, that brings with it the opportunity to stroke your ego. You get to live in a nice house. You get to go to important meetings. You get to hold press conferences. You get to make speeches, and you get to really sort of live out what for many is a dream of celebrity and perceived power. But it's all a charade. None of it matters. It really doesn't. And if you're going to play the game, you have to play by the rules of the game. And the rules of the game are established by an oligarchy, by multinational corporations, by wealthy families and others who are completely outside of this process, but who dictate the agenda for the country. And they, in turn, develop their rules based on the kinds of deals that they make with others around the planet. The oligarchy has made a deal with Zionism, with the state of Israel. The oligarchy understands that in order for it to perpetuate its power and its influence and domination of the world, that it needs access to what is found in the so-called Middle East. It needs strategic access to it and control of it. It needs its oil. It needs other things. And the state of Israel, for its part, says that we're glad to be your boys and girls in this region. We will do what we need to do in order to preserve your access to this region, and we'll protect it. But what you have to do is you have to protect us. And so, therefore, it is necessary for the U.S. government, whoever populates the political offices in the government, it is necessary for them to do what the oligarchy needs, which is to ensure the state of Israel gets whatever it needs and whatever it perceives that it needs and whatever it wants, so that it continue to play the important role that it plays for preserving imperial power. And so it doesn't, if a Joe Biden on a particular day is bothered by his conscience, he sees the role that he's playing in this game and he doesn't like it. And so he dares to float a trial balloon and to take a chance and to say, well, you know, maybe we won't fund the invasion of Rafah. Maybe that's the red line. He's quickly slapped back into place and said, you know that you're just an errand boy and you know that you must play by the rules of the game. Get back into your place, get back into your role and play it. Either that or face the consequences. And so he, in turn, does what he has to do, regardless of what his personal feelings may be. He is interchangeable. It doesn't matter who the president is. The rules of the game have been established. And so, therefore, they have to play by these rules. They have to do these things. And the great impediment that I think that the movement has is that it does not clearly think in these terms. It does not, in some cases, understand that that's what's going on. And the focus of the protests, the focus of the movement is very often on this charade of a political process, thinking that if they make enough noise, if they can demonstrate enough mass support, that somehow they will be able to influence decisions that are made by those who are in government and cause them to change the policies that they have been told that they cannot change. And so it is really an act of futility very often when that is the focus. If the movement continues to believe that even if massing in Chicago at the convention is going to make a difference in policy, they're really, really mistaken. No matter what the movement does, it will not influence the government on this issue. This is an issue where they cannot make a change. There are other issues that the oligarchy does not care that much about, and they will make concessions, they will grant concessions, they will concede things in order to keep people pacified and continuing to play in this charade of a game that they've established. But this is one that they will not compromise on. And unfortunately, the state of Israel won't give them the opportunity to compromise, even if they're concerned about the image of the United States around the world. Because the state of Israel, Zionists in particular, are paranoid. They always have been, because they've known from the outset that what they're doing is morally reprehensible and wrong. And they have known that people intuitively and instinctively stand up against injustice. And they've known that they will be opposed at every step of the way. And so they have, in their paranoia, struck out at anybody who has dared to resist the Zionist program. And when this attack by Hamas happened, then that made them even more paranoid. And it, in a sense, made them crazier than they already were. And it set them off on this program of genocide, to annihilate once and for all what they perceive to be the threat to their existence. And they're hell-bent on going forward with it no matter what. And they will give no opportunity to the imperialists, the Western imperialists or anybody else to ask for moderation. That is not part of the program they are going. And their leverage, the threat that they make, is that if you don't back us in this process of genocide, then we will not be there for you. And when you start to threaten imperial power, when you start to threaten imperialist access to the oil wealth and the influence that comes from dominating the Mideast, then you're in a place where they are not prepared to compromise themselves. So until we begin to think in those terms, I think that our effectiveness as a movement is very limited, but the time is running out. We don't have time to play games anymore with this. The survival of the planet really is at stake, and it's a time for clear thinking, honesty with ourselves about what we're dealing with and what we're living with, and definitive movements that are necessary to be made in order to bring about revolution, because this system has got to go.
So you see this as a civilizational crisis?
Oh, it definitely is. And the question is, will we continue to blissfully think that we live in a so-called democracy, that we're going to be able to influence and change? Or do we realize that what we're in is in the midst of an empire that is scrambling for its very survival, and which depends upon people being misled and confused in order for it to continue to do the dirty business that it's done?
And I was going to pivot to you, Dr. Gibbs, but if you don't mind, I'd like to pivot to Alex and to Julia, because he's bringing up something, Kathy Kelly, that I think we need to ask the young people. Because as Black people who are descendants of slaves in the United States, and that's a very important distinction. We embrace the diaspora, but Black people in America have had a singular experience, Mark Fancher. And so fascism is not new to us, Alex and Julia. This is new to the white American experience. This is part of the Black American experience. Not being listened to, being violated. That's part and parcel. In fact, I was looking at a video on YouTube University. What was interesting was that you find so many interesting pieces that come out, and I'm sure Dr. Gibbs, you might be familiar with the white paper. There's a big new Brzezinski wrote in 78 or 79 when he was the national security advisor for President Carter. And he was talking about the role that Black people play in these movements. And he zeroed in on a couple of points that stood out to me on the importance of keeping Blacks in the diaspora apart from one another, but also the role that Black people would play in the Middle East, in the discussion, in the Middle East question in the United States. The fear was that Black people, because we would really identify with the Palestinians, that we would move the needle on this discussion. And in fact, that is what has happened. And that he wrote that in 78 or 79. I downloaded the paper, which was interesting. Alex, do you see this? And when you talk to your peers, I mean, I'm posing this to you and to Julia, but first you, Alex. Do you see this as a civilizational crisis? I mean, do you see all of the tentacles that this touches? Because it's not as simple, even though genocide is a horrible thing. It's horrific. There are reasons that America is not moving. You know, this is I mean, there are a lot of business interests here. You know, no one person comes to this table. You know, you've got Europe involved. You've got the global South pushing back. And do you see this as a civilizational crisis? And are you all discussing all of the business interests? I mean, Gaza is oil and gas rich, you know, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think you can ignore the fact that having a strategic military outpost in the Middle East is the underlying reason as to why the United States is so deeply invested in Israel to begin with. But to that point, I do think money has a huge role in this and is the fundamental underlying role. Because Israel is good for business in a lot of ways. That's why the boycott, divest, sanction movement has faced such severe pushback. Is because when we start to talk about, and that's what the encampments are actually asking for, is they're asking universities to look at their endowments and look at their portfolios and actually start to divest their monetary funds from Israel. And that's the thing that got the administration so upset and caused them to come out, you know, guns a-blazing against these student encampments, is when people started to talk about, well, where does the money lead? Where is your money invested? And whether it's insidiousness or laziness or greed, you know, I don't think there's any one answer. I think it depends. There's a lot of actors in this, and I don't think there's any one, you know, catch all. But I definitely think there is a very real, concern, or rather real monetary interest in maintaining the status quo as it is right now. And that includes maintaining a strategic military outpost, having ready and easy access to oil, and whatever violence and whatever harm may come to citizens both here and of course internationally, and particularly in Palestine right now, so be it. Because as long as the bank accounts look good, then who cares about the rest of us? So it's incredibly upsetting, and I do think that there is a real truth to that.
Julia, your thoughts? I mean, because Kathy Kelly made the point that these universities, which are absolutely unaffordable now, I mean, even state schools are very expensive. The University of Chicago, $100,000 a year for an undergrad. I mean, how does that work? Julia, I mean, they are hedge funds. And it seems that, you know, if you had an encampment and you were not asking about the money, they might even let you go. But you are getting to the heart of the matter, Julia. Is that part of the discussion?
Yeah, I think the money is definitely part of the discussion. I think that, of course, what we are calling for on university campuses is for our universities to disclose their investments and to divest from Israel. And that has been a successful strategy in the past. It was a successful strategy with South Africa. And I think that the money plays such a key role. I think when I think about support for Israel in the United States, I think about two main things. One is the strategic outpost in the Middle East and the money, and the other is evangelical Christian Zionism, because that is where the largest part of the Israel lobby actually is. And yeah, so I think the money is key. I think it is definitely being talked about. And just one other thing I want to say is, I also think another group of people who has known fascism in the past is Jewish folks.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, that's what's so deeply upsetting, watching other Jews support what I believe is a fascist government and what is a fascist state in the Middle East. And Netanyahu is a fascist, and
Mm-hmm.
all of his friends and his government are too. And so I think that is something that also drives me to act. And yeah, so that's just something I wanted to add. But yeah, I think the money is definitely important, and I think the oil and these other interests.
Oh, absolutely. And I was making the point that fascism has existed in the United States,
Oh yeah, of course.
you know, um, because, there, Hank Schwab, God rest his soul, may peace be upon him. He was a Holocaust survivor, and he was one of our members at Rainbow Push, Dr. Gibbs. We have a Saturday morning forum, and he would be the first person in the auditorium. I could cry when I think of Mr. Schwab. I used to go sing at his he lived in a senior building, which was fabulous. And so as a singer, he would have me come over and give concerts because he wanted to be a great encourager. He was just a wonderful human being. And he and my brother Jonathan were particularly close. And he asked him, why is it that you beat everybody to push on Saturday morning? I mean, you're here like 8:30 in the morning. I have to come and get you. We'll take you to breakfast. and, and he said, oh, Jonathan, in his thick German accent, he said, oh, son, let me tell you something. When he came to the United States, he said, I thought I was free. And then I turned and I saw what was happening to Black people. And I said, oh my God, they're doing this all over again right here. And, but, unless you learn the lessons of your past, Julia, you repeat them. It's a very human thing. That is what we do. It's disappointing, but it's human. We do it in personal relationships. We do it in institutional relationships. Dr. Gibbs, I promised to only keep you for 30 minutes, but I always kind of go over. It's not that I don't want to. It's not that I don't respect your time, but I do love it. The name of your book again, your closing thoughts before you go.
Oh yeah, okay. Thank you. It's Revolt of the Rich: How the Politics of the 1970s Widened America's Class Divide. I guess a closing thought was just you mentioned Zbigniew Brzezinski, as National Security Advisor to President Carter. He represents a school of thought in sort of the foreign policy establishment and academia called realism, based on the idea that foreign policy should be for the elite, and they look very much negatively on the public rearing its ugly head and trying to influence foreign policy, whether it be Black Americans or really anybody else who's not the club. And he's quite right. Of course, there's no doubt that there was longstanding sympathy among African Americans towards the Palestinians based upon a perceived kind of, I don't want parallel, but somewhat similarity of their experiences. Brzezinski looked with a certain degree of fear upon that happening.
Mm-hmm.
He was a man who was steeped in the idea of secrecy and deception as being, that's the way you deal with the public. He took the view, it's been voiced by several people on the panel, and I've said it myself, Israel as an outpost for American power in the Middle East, as a protector of American interests in the Middle East. Nixon established the relationship on that basis. I think we still have that today. The foreign policy establishment, people like Biden, people like Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, they really do not like the idea of the public getting involved in these things. That's not what the public is supposed to do, even in democracy. It really raises a question of how democratic is this country and how democratic are the policy makers. And in foreign policy especially, they're not at all democratic. And I think that's coming through here. They do not want to see these demonstrations. That is not for the public to get involved in. Of course, it's a question of the public is paying the bills here. All right, the billions we're giving to Israel every year. I think the annual subsidy, just annually, is 3.8 billion, if I'm not mistaken. That's public money, and so on what grounds can you say the public has no business engaging in these things? I said it before, but I would say it again. I think that the demonstrators could do a better job of engaging the larger public, of not only expressing sympathy for the Palestinians and their plight, which is important enough, but also underscoring the fact that the public, even those of you this is a faraway conflict that doesn't concern them, really should be concerned because American support for Israel is affecting living standards in this country, as is all American spending on overseas military activity. It affects living standards. If we're spending money on guns instead of butter, instead of things like education and healthcare. And the public should be more concerned about that. Not just kids at college campuses, but people who work in places like Walmart or something. They have every right to be concerned about that. And so I think the emphasis should also be on how does this affect ordinary Americans, and the negative effects it has on ordinary Americans, and also how it weakens American security by opening up America to terrorist attacks, since America is so closely associated with Israel. So in any case, I think that the demonstrators, are doing their job in a sense of being people in a democracy and voicing their opinions. But on the other hand, they could also broaden their appeal to a wider group of people than they've been doing so far. Anyway, it's been a pleasure to be on, and I'll have to leave now. But thank you very much for having me, Santita. And,
Always. The revolt of the rich. The revolt of the rich. Go to Amazon and pre-order it now.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Kathy Kelly, when you talk about a world beyond war, I mean, it doesn't sound. Some people might think that is impossible. I don't agree with that. But I mean, and I think Dr. Gibbs just made the point. All of the money that we're spending, our own standards of living are suffering. I mean, I was on Lakeshore Drive in Chicago yesterday. The traffic jam was unbelievable. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. 9 o'clock in the morning. We had one lane open. I said, but my goodness, the infrastructure in this country is 100 years old. I mean, you talk about rebuilding Ukraine. What? I need that here. Our children don't have computers. I've got $1 trillion company that functions off of a lot of subsidies of monies from Americans, Apple. Every child should have a computer. The internet should be a public utility. We should be having those discussions, and yet these checks get routinely cut. And I realize you're right, Mark. It's not just him. I mean, but it's the oligarchs just routinely cut these checks. We can't afford this, Kathy Kelly. I mean, monetarily or morally, we can't afford it.
Well, and when we think about the idea that the only answer is to escalate violence, we're being fooled into believing that. And we're also, I think, being dangerously distracted from the great terrors we really do face. I mean, we collectively on this planet face the terror of nuclear annihilation. We face the terror of ecological collapse. And these big military industrial complex corporations, military soldiering, it won't defend us. It doesn't make us more secure in the slightest. And so I think when we see all of the bases that are all over the world, there are the 847 bases, and most of them are run by the United States. Mm-hmm. Those bases, those resources could be used to solve the very real problems we face, to defend us against ecological collapse, if you will. But not while the oligarchs that Mark has so clearly described are believing that they automatically have a God-given right to take a much larger portion of the pie than any of the people who will be left battling over the tiny pieces that are left. And so it's crucial to educate people, to pull the curtain so that we see in a mirror what we have become in this country. And I think, most of our elected representatives could be honestly regarded as flunkies for appalling crooks. And there's a gangsterism that's been used to bully and threaten anybody who speaks the truth about power or tries to speak truth to power. So again, the young people in this country have, I think, given us a reason to start claiming the strength that we could have. We are many, they are few. They are the oligarchs.
Amen. And, and the people who, Kennedy was standing up and speaking out. He said, I plan to reveal these people who are choking us. He was dead within months. Dr. King, they killed him a year to the day, to the minute, Alex, Nelson, and Julia, that he announced his opposition to the Vietnam War. April 4th, 1967, at the Riverside Church, he gave his sermon outlining his reasoning for opposing the war. It was just after 6 p.m. Just after 6 p.m., they shot him a year to the day, to the minute later. Don't ever forget that. I'm going to get literally just under a minute from each of you. And I want to thank you all for being here today because it means so much. We've got to continue to have these conversations because these conversations can spark conversations out in Radio Land. And I hope that they do. Mark Fancher, your closing thought?
Well, I think that Dr. King's assassination, Kennedy's assassination, should be instructive in that the powers that be have always looked for a Messiah that will lead the masses of people. And after King's assassination, there's a famous internal memo written by the FBI, who is the next Messiah? And they listed a number of people who might assume that role. And so they know that if there is one person who is able to galvanize the masses, who's able to excite them and get them engaged, that all they have to do is to take that person out, either by throwing them in jail or killing them. And I think that informs us that we have to have a mass understanding of these things. We can't rely upon messiahs. Everybody's got to be educated. Mm-hmm. And the most important thing that a movement right now can do is to continue to educate everybody so that everybody has a clear analysis and understanding of what's happening, so that there is no one who's vulnerable. There is no one who is so critical to the success of the movement that they can kill the movement by killing that person. And I think that a lot of that is happening. More of it is needed. And, as I always say, God's hand is in this, but we squander the opportunity that he's presenting to us if we continue to buy into the propaganda and the lies that we've been fed over the course of generations.
Julia, your closing thought?
Yeah, I think that I'm just thinking about, the student movement, and I think that it is so widely led by so many people, which is so important. I'm thinking about the ways in which I'm worried about the summer as students go home and what will happen and what will maintain this movement. And I think that's a consideration we all really need to be taking right now. But I think, and I hope people are taking it, we are taking that consideration at UNC. And I think the last thing I'll say is that I saw a sign a few weeks ago that said, "Why did Columbia make me read Edward Said if they don't want me to use it?" And that's something I've been thinking a lot about, is that these institutions are places where we are supposed to learn about what democracy is and what free speech is and what peaceful protests are. And so I think that we are learning that, but we're not learning that in the classroom, or if we are, then they don't want us to use it outside. So yeah, I think those are the things. And then the last thing I'll say is I think that while we talk about these things, it's really important to continue to keep all of our eyes on Gaza and all of our eyes on Rafah and all of our eyes on the West Bank too, where there's increasing settler violence, because that is why we are doing this and that is why we are here.
I love it. Alex Nelson, closing thought. If not now, Chicago.
Thank you. I would like to sort of reaffirm what Julia just said and maintain that our focus really needs to be on Gaza and the people of Palestine right now. They are the people who are facing the brunt of American military violence in this moment in history, and keeping them centered and keeping them top of mind, I think, is the most important thing any of us can do as we continue to build out our networks and our opposition and our organizational structures, centering them, centering their humanity, and making sure that we advocate and fight and organize on their behalf, because they are right now undergoing just horrifying human rights catastrophe, again, through no fault of their own, paid for and instigated by the United States of America. So that is the bare minimum that we can do for them.
We are at an inflection point. We have to decide who we are. Choose this day whom ye will serve. I think we both heard that somewhere, Mark. You have a choice. You have a choice. Kathy Kelly, world beyond war. We can have that. We can have a world beyond war. If not now, you asked the profound question, Alex. If not now, when? And I thank you as you put so much of your career and life on the line, Julia, for thinking beyond employment opportunities or even what you might have to deal with at your university. Thank you for that. Because there's some things that are so much bigger than the material in this world. Remember, we're human beings who are having I mean, we are spiritual beings who are having a human experience. We're not, I mean, we have to be clear on that. And we have an opportunity. You're right. You're right, Mark. God is in this. And we have an opportunity to make this world a better place because we can. Indeed, that is our obligation. So come on, everybody. You're the person you're waiting for. Get out in these streets and peaceably march. Get registered to vote. Vote down ballot. And vote where your spirit leads you. And know that voting is the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end. Whoever you put in office, and whether you vote or not, you're putting someone in office. You're going to have to fight them. And do not put anyone in office you can't fight. That's what my mama said. She's been married 62 years. I think she gets it. She said, I'd never be married to anyone I could not take on. And she said, and I will not vote for someone whom I could not fight. Because that is not democratic, everybody. Next hour, oh, what a segue. Let's talk about Trump and the trial. Oh my goodness. I'm Santita Jackson. See you on the other half in the next hour here on AM 950, the voice of